Hello, everybody. My name is Roland Feldmeyer. As Giuseppe mentioned, I am the head of Global Alliances, and I'm joined today with Richard Warren, who's my counterpart sitting in the UK while I am here in California. Normally, we would say sunny California, but it's only about 3 a.m. here. So we look forward to having a fantastic session with you. Richard, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very good indeed. And thank you very much for the intro, Roland. I look after UK, Ireland, continental Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, driving BSI's food agenda. And this is a very important presentation that you're going to hear from Roland in a moment, because we all love connectivity. We expect our devices to connect, and that's a good thing. And it is a good thing, definitely in business, but is it sometimes? How do we control that? People bringing their devices to work brings with it new threats. So we're going to be hearing a lot from Roland about this. So Roland, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. So today, as we're going through this presentation, there's some considerations for you, to think about as we have conversations. And we're going to take you through a little bit of memory lane along the way, and then show you how we arrived to where we are today and what the challenges are for organizations. So one of the main considerations is, are you able to see all of the devices that access your network? Are you able to really determine whose devices are connecting to your network and what their actual functional purpose is for connecting to those networks? So keep those thoughts in mind. And I'll give an extra statistic out there. The number of devices that you think you have in your environment, take that number and multiply that by a factor of about 3.7. There are actually 3.7 times more devices in your environment than you actually know about. And understanding what those devices are is going to be critical to everything that we talk about today. And it's actually very critical to your operational aspects from your organization. So I like to go through memory lane from time to time. And I like to say, remember when? There was a time when data used to be stored on punch cards, little pieces of cardboard that were maintained in boxes. They were locked in storerooms. So an organization's data was really locked down very nicely. It was rather inefficient in order to get to that data. However, you knew that the data itself was secure. The other aspect of remembering when is when tractors were actually driven by farmers. And so you start to think about this and bring this up because it's absolutely critical. You start to take a look at what the impact of a technology is. And if you think about what the farmers used to do, they used to get up at roughly 3 o'clock in the morning, like myself right now. And they would prepare to harvest the fields. They would get ready to feed the animals. They would get a lot of things ready for the day. And their day wouldn't end until the sun set. What were some of the outtakes of all of that productivity that the farmers had? Food or ingredients were delivered to manufacturing plants, where we had people that were actually manually packing foods into containers or actually manually handling all of the critical control points, managing the ovens, the mixers, and all of that, right? And when you think about it, those times were much simpler. It was a lot of hard work, but they were much simpler. When we take a look at technology today and what it's done in the food industry in particular, you can now start to see that the processes never stop. It's literally 7/24, and it's a world of automation. And I love the graphics that are used in this image because it actually demonstrates what's happening. We have a lot of different technologies now. And when you think about what happened way back when, all of the sourcing of ingredients were local. Nowadays, in this global economy, we're now much more interconnected. Food that is no longer just local, it is actually much more global, right? We have shipping containers of food coming from, well, here in the United States, from, let's say, Mexico. We have fruits coming in from Asia. We have fruits and vegetables coming in from all over the world, and everything is controlled through technology now, right? You have people that when they go into work, they're smart wearable devices to manage their own health. And when you take a look even further, all of this data is now actually managed in centralized locations, whether it's in a local data center stored on servers that are interconnected on the network and then now out to the internet, or whether it's autonomous tractors. So no longer does the farmer have to get up at 3 a.m. to drive the tractor to go harvest the field. They can have an autonomous tractor literally drive itself to harvest the fields. And those vehicles are all dependent on the network connectivity and ensuring that the data itself is actually well protected. So what happens if somebody impacts the GPS coordinates of an autonomous tractor? What happens if somebody actually locks out the ignition system to the autonomous tractor? Right now, you start to understand that the challenges that are happening get much more complicated, and that now also has a much more direct impact on the food production itself. So we've now become a world where automation or robots are doing a lot more of the work. We have all these. I love this photo. I'm a big ravioli eater. And so now we have raviolis that are actually being generated automatically from the robots. Imagine if somebody had control of the information or control of your network to the point where they can change the ingredients. They can change the temperature at which the items themselves are cooked. They can actually change the temperature at which things are being stored or at what rate things are being cooled. So now all of a sudden, things that used to be local are much more global, and the impact of technology and the risk of loss of data or access to your systems is highly likely when you start to talk about all of the different devices that touch a network, right? And from our own telemetry, what we've learned is that roughly about 20% of all devices that enter your environment, whether those are robots that are installed in the environment or automated baking systems or mixing systems, all of the automated systems that are out there that rely on network data, as well as all of the smartphones, the tablets, the wearable devices, all of those things connect onto your network. And roughly about 28% of those actually present a high risk in the environment. If we take a look at, Richard, actually, you guys
Roland, this slide is so important. I would add to that. I mean, look at that, 70% of all devices are unmanaged. And people might say, well, what's that got to do with me in the food industry? Well, actually everything, because one of my favorites is that IoT devices are sneaking into the food environment a little bit undetected in a way. For example, pest control boxes. They used to be quite dumb pest control boxes, something like a bait box, but they're being upgraded to smart pest controllers. So they're connected to the Wi-Fi. They're connected to the company system. And I was involved in an incident not too far ago when someone hacked into that because they spotted a new signal and they just typed in admin 123. And they were in there for 40 days and they shut all the robots down. But that's because, they were using existing credentials, just like it says in that box. And then if you look at the growth in the number of IoT devices, where we're going to be at 2025, you're more than doubling where we are today. So that's quite scary. And it really brings home the importance of being aware of the devices that not only do we bring in, but third-party companies, service providers bring into our premises and onto our plant that can introduce with it a vulnerability. Roland, back to you.
Great, thank you, Richard. So as we start to take a look at the different aspects out there, what does this interconnected world mean? And when you take a look at it, it was actually quite interesting. I was at a dinner party last night, and somebody asked me about what impact does technology or does this interconnected world have on industry in general. And I started talking about, the food industry as well. And the bigger challenge now is look at the effect that all of these devices are connected onto the network, and they're now literally accessible via the internet. Bad things are really starting to happen. And so we can see, the items that are happening in the media. So there was a grain handler in the US that was recently impacted by a Russian hacking group, right? JBS USA was impacted with their supply chain of getting meats from the packing plants out into the distribution network. So on one side, we have somebody that's impacting the the growth side of things, or the growing side of things, that then feeds into, let's say, the animals and so forth. And then on the other end, we have people that are disrupting the supply chain. And Richard, I know you guys have been doing quite a bit of work and research in this area as well. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Absolutely. I mean, in my talks with the food industry, the people in the food industry often say, well, we're not a target for cyber attacks. Well, recent events prove that wrong. I talk to financial institutions, and they rarely get much trouble these days because their shields are up. They've been the focus of attention for the last 15 or 20 years. So they actively manage cybersecurity very, very well. And they need to, of course. So the criminals have moved on to coin a phrase, lower hanging fruit, easier targets. And the food industry is an absolutely prime subject for cyber attacks. And if you look at that JBS one, that was huge. And when that happened, everything ground to a halt. They couldn't get the meat out, but furthermore, animals that were on their way to slaughterhouses suddenly had nowhere to go. They had to be turned around, sent back to the farms. There was this huge backlog. The whole supply chain just froze up. And curiously, 3 days later, JBS were back in action again, which was great. But I said to my colleagues, they paid. And they did pay. They paid $11 million to the Russian gang. And it keeps happening. And the most recent one there was the Minnesota grain handler. I think that was $3 million as well. So, no one is really, really safe. I think the odds of going into space like William Shatner did is about 1 in 14,000, about the same as winning the lottery. But the chances of getting hacked are like 100%. It's just a question of time before that happens. So this really has to be a bit of a wake-up call for the food industry to say, look, we've got to manage the way that things connect, manage our access and our and who's connecting to it, because it's not done very well at all. Roland, back to you.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're not driving the point home hard enough, let's talk about, some of the other aspects here, right? One of the fundamental questions is, well, how do people actually get control of our systems? And a lot of this is, it comes back to basics. And when we talk about the basics, it's changing those default passwords, as Richard had mentioned, of devices that you install on the network. It also has this notion of being sure that your passwords themselves are secure. But a lot of this comes down to just simple human error. That's ultimately what happens in each and every one of these breaches, is that it's typically some sort of human error that was involved in getting, or allowing the hackers in one way or another. So how can we address something like this? And when we start talking about the concept of these hackers, one thing to keep in mind is that they are extremely sophisticated. It is no longer just a bunch of people just sitting in front of computers trying to break into things. They've gotten smarter. They've realized that they can only operate so many hours a day, per person. And they've actually developed very significant or very sophisticated hacking tools. So they're using automation in their hacking activities to try and find different ways to break into systems. So what we've learned at WootCloud, and part of our primary premise, is that you can't just have a bunch of good people, a lot of people in your IT organization, fighting against criminals that are using automated tools. human beings are just going to lose against the computer every time. I don't know how long it takes you to multiply 23 times 256. Figure that out, the computer moved on to a million other operations, right? So think about how fast you can type to try and actually beat a computer at something. It's a losing battle. So we actually need to use automation and smart intelligence inside. Love that redundancy, but you have to use intelligence in your security infrastructure in order to combat the automated tools of the bad guys, so to speak. So at WootCloud, what we've developed is a technology that fits into every organization, and we've operate on three simple premises. One, the first and foremost, is to detect. We need to detect everything that is on the network, whether it's trying to connect on the network or whether it's actually connected to the network. We need to be able to help you identify what all of those devices are. Then what we need to do is inspect all of those devices. How many of those devices are actually devices that should be on the network? How many of them belong to the organization, and how many of them belong to just the individuals that brought those devices in?
I see.
But let's take it a step further. So Richard, what do you think about this idea of not just being able to detect and inspect the devices, but actually determining the functional use and the functional purpose of each device that's out there?
Well, that's incredible. So what you're talking about then is are people coming on site, visitors that we have on site that bring their phones with them. And what you're saying is that you can detect whether their phone is actually trying to access the network through even an automated system. And what if, for example, that particular device, and we're hearing more about phones having viruses on them, what if a visitor comes with a phone that's got a virus on there that suddenly is trying to get onto the network? This is going to pick it up. Is that the case?
Yeah, this is absolutely one of those situations that's out there. And actually, one of the interesting technologies are the Bluetooth devices. So we all have them in our ears, or we're wearing them on our wrists. Bluetooth actually has a number of vulnerabilities associated with it. So
thanks, Roland. You just ruined my day.
Yes, I will be speaking in your ear later today, whether you wanted to or not. But yeah, but on a more serious note, think about all of the devices that are in your environment. So whether it connects to a network, like a standard Ethernet network, or using Wi-Fi or using Bluetooth, now somebody comes in with a phone that, and it's, unbeknownst to them that their phone is infected. And so now all of a sudden that phone or that tablet walks into your environment, and it's in the background trying to find any vulnerable devices, whether it's on the network or via Bluetooth. And now it's trying to find those devices. And once it actually connects to those, they now start to navigate their way throughout your network. So it starts to get very scary very quickly. And so by understanding all of the devices that are in your environment and what their functional purpose is, or as I like to say, their contextual use, we can now put together a very robust defense mechanism that helps organizations protect themselves against all of the different types of devices that could actually impact their environment. Okay, so whether it's blocking devices, so you may want to set up a policy inside of your inside of your production facilities that prohibits cell phones or mobile phones or personal devices. Yes.
Yeah, that's ideal. That is, so you bring it into a safe space.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating a nice defense zone. Yeah. And so now imagine you get into these production facilities, and I would hold up my bottle of Coca-Cola here, but but think about how recipes and everything are very very secret to organizations. And if you have a mobile phone or even a wearable IoT camera, so for your inspection teams to take a look at things, right? Those devices themselves are connecting to the network as well. So now imagine if somebody actually had remote control of those devices unbeknownst to you. And now as you are walking around and performing inspections and looking at documents, they're now getting these, or they're now getting the feed of the video, potentially disrupt your business operation just by gaining knowledge of your recipes. Kind of scary, right?
Well, we actually do virtual audits. It's becoming much more normal, and the industry is becoming more comfortable, Roland, with virtual audits. And we use these wearables, ATEX approved technology that you can take into dust conditions and stuff like that. And we went to one particular organization that at their critical control points, they had QR codes on the wall. And we thought, well, that's really good. The absolute instant that the camera that the auditor was wearing spotted the QR code, up came the document. It just retrieved it from the server. So that particular critical control point, and in how that critical control point was being managed, what these critical controls were, the highs, the lows, the temperatures, that was all visible on this document to the auditor. And we thought, well, that's really good. It was a really cool way to access the document. But now you think about it and the way you explain it, that is actually introducing another vulnerability. But with this approach, you could actually control that. That's what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah, we would have the ability to actually restrict those IoT cameras, those wearable cameras, to only a certain portion of the network. And on that portion of the network, we can keep those devices from communicating to the outside world without your control.
Good.
Yep. So it's great that you brought up this whole concept of doing these virtual audits. One of the things that we've done now at WootCloud quite successfully over the last couple of years is we've actually offered to customers to basically do an audit for them of their environment. Wow. Whether it's the entire environment or a subset, and most customers opt for the subset. But what's great about this device security assessment is it is extremely low risk to an organization. What we mean by that is it is completely out of band, so that it does not sit in the data path. And so if something gets in the way, or if something happens on your network, we know that we are not part of that, that outage, as an example, right? So we get data from a different path altogether. And what we also wind up with is it's only about a 2 to 3 week engagement. So it's very short. And at the very end, you actually wind up with a very robust report that gets put together by both WootCloud and BSI to help you understand as a customer what those risks are in the environment. And what I'm sharing on here as well are kind of the different stages. And this is a great example of a local organization to myself where we did one of these audits. And literally in the course of 2 weeks, we found several very high-risk devices in their environment. And this is an organization that deals in developing medications for rare diseases. So imagine the intellectual property that was at risk for these folks if a hacker actually successfully got into the environment, what that would do to their overall business, right? It's pretty scary. But also know that together with BSI and WootCloud, we have an ability to work with all customers to actually get them into a state of readiness for this daunting world of interconnectivity as it pertains to the food industry, and how we can help prevent those disruptions in that overall global food supply chain, right? So Richard, I don't know about you, but I'm very excited about being able to work with customers. We'd love to ask additional questions or answer questions for folks. Whether we can get to your questions today, we'll be happy to do so, but feel free to reach out to us directly and we're happy to answer questions as well.